So in the design of the program that when we were designing the program a number of weeks ago, one of the things we felt it was important to do was to try to give the strategic context, if you like, for water development. And it was very interesting to see yesterday and on Monday the examples of water programs in Brazil, and also yesterday to hear about TD and to see reverse engineering theory and practice, and also to see some of the science and technology yesterday afternoon. So all of those things are very specific and detailed, but what we thought it'd be useful to do would be to have a general insight into these UN World Water Development Reports. And one of the things, I've actually read these to my credit, I think, and I found them extremely interesting documents. Has anybody else read any of these documents? Page 2 of the most recent one, right? Okay, so I would suggest that these are actually quite fundamental. If we're in the business of safe water and trying to understand the strategic context, then I think it's important to understand the trends or the developments that are taking place within the actual sector. I keep on using these business terms, but that's what I'm used to. And you can see that these are actually quite significant publications that draw on a whole range of different experts from across the world. But significantly, in each report, and they've been published since I think 2003, you have part of the report is geographical assessment of water development in different parts of the world, because geographical context is extremely important. The challenges that you have in some parts of the world are obviously different from others. So what I thought I'd do is to try and highlight some of the key trends about these in these reports. And there are two key trends which I'll tell you now. The first one is that it's actually the emphasis has changed from the start of these reports from a description of the water problem to a much more strategic and holistic assessment of water, which is about the sustainability of economic development and social development, basically. So it's moved from describing things, the water problem, to trying to understand the interconnectedness of different levels of analysis of the water problem under the whole idea of sustainability. So that's the first insight. It's actually moved in emphasis, and you can discern that as you go through each of the years right up to the present. So that's the first thing, the first insight, that the approach has changed from a UN perspective. The second thing is that it's the idea that how we approach these things, our reaction to these changes changes itself. In other words, the traditional ways in which we've approached these things needs to change. There are opportunities for things like innovation and entrepreneurship, and it's that sort of idea that it's creating opportunities, and to be aware of these is quite important. So only one or two people have looked at the reports, but what I would suggest is that it's important to have a look at the ones that are relevant to yourself. One of the other things that we've noticed, myself and my colleague who are reviewing these, that we're writing a paper about this at the moment, is that one would think that these are definitive and authoritative reports that give the considered truth about the water situation. But what we found is these are actually contested. And one of the things we noticed, especially in this, there was one of the reports, Water and Jobs. This report actually generated a lot of criticism because it identified assumptions about the water challenge in the world that were contested. So when I looked at these at the start, I thought these were the definitive assessment of what was going on in the water sector globally. And then what we found was it's actually contested. There are things in this that are assumptions that people don't agree with. So that's one of the other insights from it, that not only is there a development in our understanding, but some of these are contested items, especially an economic view of water and also the development view of water. So again, this gives us a context while you're doing your science and your technology. The actual ground rules, if you like, of the sector are actually changing, which is both a threat to what you're doing and also an opportunity. So that's the two insights. So I'm just going to go through a couple of points about that to get us thinking about it. So as we say, it's the leading publication of UN Water. It's from the unit that coordinates the UN's work on water and sanitation. So it is extremely influential. It brings together lots of different people. And as I say, given only 2 or 3 people in the group have looked at it, I would suggest it's worth looking at. Now, interestingly, what I've noticed as well is that whilst it was published every couple of years at the start, it's now coming out every single year. There seems to be an urgency and almost a panicking concern that much more of this information needs to be in the public domain. So it's becoming more regular and it's becoming much more insightful, I think, as a publication. So your thoughts on this initially: an increasing global water crisis endangers the security, stability, and environmental sustainability of developing countries, and all countries, I would suggest. There's been a recognition that the management of water resources requires an integrated approach, and this is what Kathleen is going to talk about. So how useful do you think this type of publication by the UN is in contributing to problem solving? Given the 3 people in the group have looked at any of them, how useful are they? Are these simply publications that are generated and ignored by us who are in this sector? Or how useful are they? And secondly, have you any ideas of how integrated approaches to water management could help in terms of our approach to safe water? So do you want to talk about that with the person beside you for a couple of minutes? Are these publications useful? And how can we engage with them in any meaningful way as part of our activities? So do you want to talk together? Okay, so I've asked you to have a think about these UN water reports, and as I said, when I asked who had looked at them, 3 people in the group have actually looked at them. So 2 questions. The first one is about, are they actually useful? Is this simply the UN, the illusion of activity, the UN producing reports that very few people will look at, that very few people will be influenced by what their assessments are? So do you think these publications are useful? What's your assessment of that?
They're only going to be useful if people... Oh, thank you. Used to shouting. They're really only going to be useful if people read them and take cognizance of what's actually contained within them.
Yes. So why haven't 90% of the people in our group, who are actually all devoted to researching water challenges in the globe, why haven't they read them? One wonders.
One does.
Okay, so that's the first question. So are they actually useful? Are they a waste of time? Should they just stop producing them? Or are they actually useful? And if they are useful, why aren't we engaging with them? Anybody else? Paddy?
Mike, who is the UN? They're not lawmakers.
Mm-hmm.
I know what they are, but they don't make laws. They don't make regulations. They don't tell anybody what to do. They don't reassess if the reports that they write are useful. So why should we look at these reports as being of value?
Good question.
Who are they written by? Who do they expect to read them?
Mm-hmm.
And where's the value?
That's my question. So are they actually of any value at all? Are they useful? Question mark. So your assessment is they aren't useful?
They're not useful personally to me, unless I want to write a grant application and go, my work matches these aspirations by this group of diplomats that represent countries that probably have never been to the areas where the problems are.
To be fair, if
most of the stats are very generalized. So they'll sum up Brazil with one statistic, 74% have access to water. But that doesn't break down and look at the disparity within countries.
So that means, is there something missing for people like us? If we haven't been motivated, most of the group haven't been motivated to look at it, is there another mechanism? Is there an opportunity, in other words, going to the second point, for SafeWater to do something that addresses the concern that you've articulated?
That might be very personal to me, I don't know, but
yeah.
So if you think about the Kyoto Protocol for climate change organised by United Nations, which countries did not take part? United Nations, China, Russia. A third of the countries that produce the emissions didn't take part because the United Nations has no power to make them.
Okay, so is this relevant then to us as UN? Are these reports, are they relevant? They're being published, there are lots of experts put into them. Many of us haven't read it. So what I'm trying to get to is there an opportunity for SafeWater here? That if these aren't perceived, well, is that a widespread perception? What do other people think about these reports? I mean, Paddy's concerned about them because they're unrepresentative, he feels. Any other thoughts about the reports?
I think Patrick's point is extremely valuable because the UN reports, they are somehow in between of not being academic and not being popular enough to reach the wider audience. So you're not providing enough data so academics can actually trust in the figures that are represented in the report. But you're also not making it what in Portuguese we call popularization of science, making it accessible enough so politicians can actually base their decisions on the information that is presented in the report.
Okay, that's a very interesting point, because one of the things we were talking about yesterday was the legitimacy of knowledge and this idea of mode 1 and mode 2 knowledge, which is academic knowledge. And social knowledge. Social knowledge. And the idea is that you've got the two types, the mode 1 and mode 2. So in terms of the trying to see and use these reports, one wonders, is there an opportunity for SafeWater that meets the needs of the challenges that Paddy has articulated and you've articulated as well, that is not academic enough. It's almost like a popularization of diplomats and policymakers and things like that that hasn't really got real resonance with people who are researching the thing, because if it was relevant to you, you'd be looking at it. But also it isn't popular enough to make an impact with societal partners. So the UN reports seem to be almost like a PR activity in a sense. But they're also trying to capture a sort of mood amongst policymakers, which is seeming to be moving in a certain direction. And one of the things that I was impressed by in them was the idea that there are different paradigms being evolving in different parts of people who are researching this water problem and water issue. So I think one of the things about it is, if it's a PR exercise, if it actually is a gap, then I think there is an opportunity for us. So can you think about, given what we've heard, what possible ways could SafeWater fill that gap as part of our development? Do you want to talk about that for a couple of minutes? What could we do that actually would take advantage of this opportunity? Okay, so the question's been asked then, if the perception in the group is that these are of limited value and it's perhaps even a PR exercise by the United Nations, that goes on to the question then, well, is there an opportunity for SafeWater to do something then that fills the gap between academia and society? So have you any thoughts on that? Is there something that we could do in our development that could actually address this issue? Any thoughts?
It's actually a question. Patrick, have you published a paper with Mike already? Have you, Bill? Have you, Nigel?
We're thinking about it.
So that is actually, it's just provoking because we have several different disciplines within the project, but we are actually producing academic knowledge within our own areas of expertise. So we should be the one integrating the different disciplines.
Which I agree with. So we've already talked with our colleagues, the scientists, and also with our colleagues in CTA about joint publications, which I think is a crucial thing to go from now on. This idea of integration has been one that we've talked about from the start, but needs to happen as we go through the final 2 years of the project. So part of the outcome of this week for us is to identify partners who we can work on for tangible projects, and we've been speaking with colleagues about that. So that's exactly one of the things we should do. Any other opportunities for SafeWater to address this gap that we've identified in terms of communicating the issues about the water challenge globally?
I don't really want to speak, but so our project is not set up to investigate and solve the global water crisis. Our project is very specific, and this is the problem with water generally. Everybody knows how to treat water, but you've got to get the appropriate treatment to the right people for the right cost, and it'd be socially acceptable. That's the challenge about water. It's not about how to make it safe. It's about how to design bespoke solutions for specific communities, and that's a global problem. How do you tailor the technology for the end users to make it work for their conditions, to make it acceptable, to make it maintenance free, and to get people to use it? Because there's maybe 30% of the population that have never used. So how do you change that mentality? It's not about writing reports or filling gaps, it's about how do you use what we know works with the context, the setting, and the people. And that's the global problem. It's not there's no magic new technology that's going to fix that.
Yeah, I think that's the key point that's been coming out all of this week, is that technology has to be surrounded by some value model or some social way of communicating and enacting these things. But how do we do that? I mean, you've just said it. How do we do that in SafeWater, apart from joint publications? But what else do we need to do? Do we know? Okay, any other thoughts? What do we do if, the UN is publishing these reports, we're slightly cynical about it, we're not engaging with it. SafeWater is part of this sector, we're doing technology. So what other things do we need to do you think, for our own development as a group? Stunned silence. Okay, I'm just trying to be provocative, because what I noticed was when I looked at the Swiss reports and the Swiss organizations that are in the water sector, they're doing things that are extremely similar to what we're trying to do, with one exception, which is the fundamental science and technology, I think. So one of the things is how we maybe differentiate ourselves, using business terms, or link in with other groups to do things that are effective. And this is part of the challenge that I've been looking at. So it's how you actually develop and go forward in this, so we actually can demonstrate. This is all to do with demonstrating impact. Okay, so that's the first issue, is that there's an awful lot of information out there. There's probably too much information. We've got a specific grant to develop technology and try to get people to use that, which is a real challenge. So I want to identify two of the reports that I actually found useful or interesting. The first one was this. Well, you can see the sorts of different topics that they use. water as an holistic approach to water, water and the Millennium Development Goals, water and risk, and various views about different aspects about water. But one of the ones that I was interested in was this one, and this is about water and jobs. And it sort of highlights Paddy's point about, who are these people that are writing things? And one of the things about this was that it got a lot of criticism, and it's useful to see what that criticism was. Is by these authors from a journal that we've actually targeted ourselves, Development and Change. And it's about how they reviewed the underlying assumptions about the water challenge in this particular report. So very, very interesting, very insightful review of it. And one of the things that they did was the different assumptions about the nature of development. And the thing I noticed is that development is a term that's sort of bandied around or sort of used in publications, and yet this is a contested term. It's the idea that there are different types of development. The post-war project of northern intervention into the global south, which we mentioned Max Neef yesterday, who was very much critical of that way of looking at things, but also this little d development, which is the set of capitalist processes where companies come into different countries to try and do development as well. So these were criticisms of the assumptions that were implicit in this report. And the authors came up with some contradictions inherent in the report, which I found very interesting. And some of them were that is water expert knowledge a universal thing? Is there one defined body of evidence which suggests that water is, that there's an expert or an expertise which is agreed about this? Another contradiction that the reviewers came up with was who benefits from public-private partnerships in terms of water development, who benefits from economic growth, job creation, and efficiency gains. And again, part of their criticism was the local context and whether local people were actually gaining from interventions that were being developed. And lastly, they talked about is how real is water scarcity, which is an assumption that it's a scarce resource in the world. And some of the presentations from over the last couple of years I've listened to from my colleagues said water isn't scarce, it's just getting access to clean water or actually getting access to water are the issues. So that's from that 2018, 2016 report, it's really highlights some of the contradictions that are inherent in water and how you engage with that in our efforts to get safe water. On the positive side, I think this, if you're going to read any of these reports, I would recommend this one. I think this is a really insightful, game-changing assessment of how you tackle the water challenge globally. And it's really based on this idea of nature-based solutions for water. And the idea is about working with nature to improve water management, resources, achieve water security, and so on. But the crucial thing about this is that technological and scientific interventions in themselves sometimes have an unpredictable, and disruptive effect on existing ways of doing things. So one of the things that they come up with is the idea that if you use nature-based solutions that have already been proven and work with those, it often creates a much more effective way of dealing with the water challenge. Now, in terms of safe water, I think this is actually quite an interesting dimension, which is that if you work with natural processes and natural ways of working with water and solutions for that, that actually can be a much more effective way than purely scientific or engineering approaches. So I'll ask you the question, are nature-based solutions relevant to the specific work that you're undertaking as part of safe water? Natural processes, working with local ways of doing things, and actually having solutions which aren't groundbreaking, but they're effective. Can you think, especially the scientists and the engineers in the room, can you think of how going with natural ways of solving these problems can actually be an interesting alternative direction for your research? Do you want to think about that and talk about it for a minute? Naturally based approaches. Okay, so the question is, are nature-based solutions relevant to the work that you're doing as part of SafeWater? Which begs the question, what is a nature-based solution? Now, do you remember, I'll give you an example. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, what caused the flooding? Apart from the hurricane? What was one of the primary reasons why the flooding happened? The water infrastructure. One of the things about the US Corps of Engineers spent about 70 years doing levees along the Mississippi River. And they reckon that engineering intervention partly caused the disaster as well as the natural intervention. So what was the solution that they've started to do, the nature-based solution that they're bringing in? They're actually having these natural wetlands being restored so that excess water can go into those and deal with any of these events which are now increasing in regularity because of climate change. So natural-based solution or nature-based solution is one of these interventions where it minimizes human activity or the need for constant human intervention to keep a solution going for something. Now, in terms of your research or the activities that we're doing, has anybody any examples of an activity to do with what their work that minimizes human intervention or continuous human intervention?
Not using chlorine, so you get increased buy-in from the community. Oh, not using chlorine so that you get increased buy-in from the community.
Okay, well, that's a really good example. We've said this a couple of times. And despite the science being that it's the cheapest, I'm assuming, that's what I'm hearing, it's the cheapest and most effective way of cleaning water. The fact is how do you get the chlorine, and that continuous intervention to do that is a barrier. So, I mean, it's a very simple example, but it's trying to get across the idea that nature-based solutions are ones that tend to minimize technological intervention on a continuous basis. That's one of the issues. I'll give you another example. In Boston, they've done a development which is called the Big Dig. Does anybody know what that is in Boston? What was it? The Big Dig?
It's like a new development in the center of the Boston that put the streets down the river and down the soil.
Yeah, what they did was they had in Boston they used to have these train tracks above the city which were very intrusive. So what they did was they then took those away, created a linear park, and then put the traffic, trains and transport beneath the city. But what that requires is pumps that pump out water continuously. And they said that these will not fail because they've got backups. They've failed a couple of times. In Belfast, we've got an example of this as well, where they've got a road infrastructure which is buried, and they've got pumps for emergencies, which they said that would be used maybe once every 100 years. The road's been open 6 years. They've been pumping it out 4 times. So the idea is, it's this idea of continuous engineering or scientific intervention into a solution, which is questioned now by these nature-based solutions. So what I would suggest, the takeaway for me from this publication from the UM was that an alternative way of looking at technology, it's looking at technology in terms of its sustainability. Does the intervention require a continuous and costly process that people simply won't do, and therefore the intervention's literally a waste of time? And that's one of the challenges that they're highlighting in that report, which is, as I say, is one of the most insightful reports I've seen about that. So in terms of your research, are there any examples that you can think of the need to minimize continuous intervention for the solution that you're providing? Any other examples?
Another option for water treatment is use natural coagulants. It's interesting for pre-treatment. It's possible clean the water, but it's not efficient enough. It's a pre-treatment, but we need another treatment for have a safety water. It's an option, in my point of view. It's possible use natural coagulants inside of the SafeWater project.
Okay, that's a second example. A third example, what's you're saying?
For example, the green roofs up to the buildings is a nature-based solution to intercept the rainfall and to collect the rainfall, and with that the infiltrations, the runoff decrease in the urban areas, so you decrease the risk of floods, for example. Okay. Oh yes, and we say that you can reuse this water of the green roof to use in your houses. Yes. Also, that gardens in the cities that retain also the rainfall is to decrease the flow into the pavement, the impermeable soil in the city, to decrease this flow of water.
Okay, so there's 3 examples of nature-based solutions that minimize the continuous need for human intervention to keep things going. And as I said, one of the things I've noticed from the last couple of years from colleagues speaking about their technologies is that it's after 6 months when you go back to a village or a community that are using a technology and it isn't being used is one of the most depressing things, because obviously the effort has been made to do the technology, but the continuous use of it is not there, and that's the synthesis of what these nature-based solutions are. That there's a continuity of the intervention that doesn't require some sort of major effort on the part of the people who are benefiting from it.
Mike, one of the problems is that we contaminate the water. We mix together the water from brushing your teeth or washing your face with the sewage.
Mm-hmm.
So the intervention would be not to mix together, but all of the infrastructure is developed. And even if we consider that the UK is a developed country,
Mm-hmm.
the planning permission for houses says you must now separate, like Catalina suggests, the rainwater separately. But our infrastructure, so in my house that I built recently, we have a separate system to collect the rainwater and to collect the sewage, 2 pipes that come into the street. And what happens? Put them together, because the infrastructure can't separate, can't cope. So all of that water goes to the sewage works. There's now too much population, all of these flood events, and the sewage works can't physically treat the water that we've put together.
Okay.
So if we didn't put together, and when I visited Turkey 20 years ago, they were redeveloping all their pipe work so they had their grey water separated from their brown water.
Yes.
So if we think about what falls from the sky, it's not totally safe, but it could be treated with much less energy, much less chemicals, and then could be consumed, and you would have safe water.
Okay.
So it's not, we've made the problem more difficult by the development of the infrastructure that we use. And just letting the water stay in a tank will let most of the dirt pass out, just settles out.
Yeah.
And so we've big massive reservoirs. We have storage tanks. Hector showed us lots of these big Mayan-shaped tanks to collect water.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is most of the large particles settle out, and the water is much safer just by that process of doing nothing.
Yeah.
So some of these nature-based solutions don't have to be as
Sophisticated.
complicated as we want to try to make them.
It's a very good point, because in business we have a term called disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation is where a technology comes in which is a lesser technology. It's cheaper, it's quicker to use, and it meets the needs of most people most of the time. And that is compared with a radical technological innovation, which is at the forefront of your science or your technology, which is too expensive, too hard to input, too hard to maintain. So disruptive innovation is a very common idea in business where a small company or an organization comes in and uses a lesser technology. It's not the sophistication of the technology, it's a lesser type of your technology which can actually solve the problem for most people. So it's simplicity. And that's the basis of this nature-based approach as well. Any other examples?
It's not an example, it's a comment about that Patrick said. In our case, it's more easy. For example, in SafeWater, you put in each house a solution. Normally, in the cities, use collective solution. Collective solution is more easy in administrative form, business. It's more easy, but it's less for problem. It's less sustainable. But if you put one solution by home, you are responsible of your home, and the responsibility is yours, and you must be more friendly with the nature. It's your responsibility. This is the point. This is the big contribution.
Mike, this is one of the ironies of the UN reports. So, well done. We make great progress with availability of water. Even though you might have to walk for 1 kilometre to get a well that's not safe. Tick for UN. What is the progress with sanitation? 50%?
Yeah.
So just because you have got safe water, or what the UN classify as a progress towards that, doesn't mean there's any improvement in health if you don't tackle sanitation.
Okay. Which gets to the point that it's the multi-perspective nature of this. I mean,
It's a multifaceted.
Yeah. One of the difficulties I have is that, and I take your point, it's about we've got to focus on clean water or safe water. That's the focus of this thing. But increasingly, when I look at this, it's the multi-perspectives on this. And in a sense, is it realistic to do it by itself? Is that beyond the scope of the project? And this is a dilemma that I have, that it's got multiple perspectives and things like that. Just as a final point, I mean, you were talking about infrastructure. Yesterday I mentioned that in the Republic of Ireland, there's a major water challenge at the moment for Dublin, and that because of climate change and the size of Dublin, there's going to be a real scarcity of water over the next couple of years. I also mentioned that in the west of Ireland you have a very big river called the Shannon River, which is the biggest one on the island. So what would a solution be from an engineering perspective to solve Dublin's water problem? Do you think? How would an engineer solve Dublin's water problem?
Thinking about the technology, in my point of view, slow zone filtration is a good option in some communities because it's a natural by-site solution. It's easy to construct build the device.
Yeah.
And maybe is friendly to use. Is not there are problems with this technology, but we working for improve the efficiency. But it's interesting because it's a biological reactor. We have a natural process happening inside of the filter. Maybe the people, it's possible the community works well with this kind of filter in the SafeWater project.
Okay, as one of the natural processes. But my final point was about Dublin and the supply of water. So, I mean, the natural thing is to build a pipeline from the Shannon River to Dublin, which will cost, how much do you think? 2 billion euros. And then someone did a study of it and said, hold on, let's question the assumptions about this. So what do you think they found out about water in Dublin? The water supply in Dublin? There's lots of it? No? What No. The water in Dublin, a high percentage of it is actually leaked out before it gets to taps. What percentage do you think? Over 50%. So the water's purified. It goes to Dublin. Before it gets to your tap, half of it is leaked away. And now they said there's a water scarcity problem, and the engineering solution is to spend £2 billion for a pipeline from the Shannon River to Dublin. And someone has said, the assumptions that you have about that problem are wrong. And that's part of this whole thing about the reports, to be fair to them, I think do start to get people to challenge assumptions about their understanding of the nature of a water problem. So in Dublin, what they should do is replace the leaking pipes rather than spend £2 billion, which is what London has done. London replaces I think 1% of its pipage every year, and it's done that for a number of years. It's money, it's cheaper to do it. So my time is up, but as I say, just to recap, I think the UN development reports are, a cynic would say, Paddy, that they're simply a PR exercise. I think they're actually very valuable because it gives you an insight into the thinking behind policymakers. They also give you examples, case studies in each publication from different parts of the world, which try to illustrate how things are happening. Academics who have looked at these reports are highly critical of some of them because of the assumptions that they have about development in different parts of the world. So part of on the positive side about these reports is that they illustrate that thinking about the water challenge is changing. As I said, if you read any of them, I think the nature-based one is very, very insightful because the message for us on our research group is that scientific and engineering sophistication isn't, what's great in itself, it isn't necessarily the solution for problems that exist in different places. It's that there has to be an appropriate solution, and that solution can be a lesser technology, but which is used more consistently by the users. So that's what I've got from it. And any questions or observations about that understanding that I've got? Okay, so that's the UN report, so now we know. What I'd like to do now is to ask Catalina to give a talk on her particular experiences, the real life experiences in her particular setting. So Catalina,